Good day, my name is Cassie Skutte. I'm the CEO of Health Window in South Africa. Today I'm going to cover why switching from one product to another has a lot of misperceptions around it, and also why it's not such a big opportunity or risk as many people perceive it to be. Firstly, when you ask pharmacists, this was done with surveys, how many of their patients do they offer a switch? They easily respond, all of them. And that is really their perception that they offer a switch to all of them. But as you start asking questions, they start saying some things, such as that they exclude patients that were already switched before, that they exclude patients that has a doctor's script for a generic product already, or that they exclude patients that bring in a repeat or a renewed script. Then they just make sure they dispense what was previously dispensed. That only leaves a few of those newly diagnosed patients in the pool to be switched. So only if someone is really newly diagnosed do they come in and get offered a switch. So the question is, what fraction of all of them is actually being offered a switch? To determine that, we analyzed some data, which I'll show you now. So we looked at patients that brought in scripts with 6 repeats left. In January 2017, there were 582,750 of those patients. Then we looked at which of those patients can we not see as previously having a dispense at any of the pharmacies which we service. And that was around 158,000 of those. It equates to 32% of them. And patients that have been previously dispensed the exact same medication amounted to about 400,000 out of around 600,000. So it's roughly 2/3 of those patients. So the only patients that could be offered a switch is the 32% of those patients. Then the question is that remains is how many of them actually accept that switch. In some pharmacies and certain LSM levels, some reject the switch, whilst others easily say yes to that switch. A second misperception is that patients within the data that we usually show when we track them and lock them in for 12 months, all these red cells or non-dispensers that follows an initial dispense seems to be potentially switching. So I just took a sample product here, Ciplacil, and I locked in whoever bought in January 2016, and I followed them over the next 12 months whether they still bought Ciplacil. Then we did something different. We said, okay, there seems to have been 110 lost transactions, which could be either adherence or switching. If we then changed that and said, well, let's look at whether they persisted on the molecule, we can still see about 81 red cells or non-dispensers, meaning that 81 lost transactions on 20 patients occurred, and that's about 4 per patient, compared to the original 110, which is 5.5 per patient. So we think that difference between who is no longer getting Ciplacil but is getting another ACE inhibitor, that is the switching part. So we assume 29 patients were switched because they are still taking an ACE inhibitor, but it's not Ciplacil. So 1.5 out of 12 dispensers is roughly, or lost dispensers, we think is switching. The other 4 dispensers out of 12 is lost due to non-adherence. So non-adherence is definitely a bigger issue in the data that we see than switching. If we compare that, just to give some scale to the issue, is 29 patients were switched in that small example, whilst 81 stopped filling the script or didn't fill regularly, which is just pure non-adherence. So the battleground is usually the investment goes towards that 29 or that small 26% of patients that are switching or willing to switch, whilst 74% of the patients that are non-adherent is often being left alone by the generics companies especially. They just want to pay for the switch without getting the adherence levels up.